Few things are more shocking than seeing a massive heavyweight fighter get knocked out cold. It's like watching Godzilla crumble or the Incredible Hulk faint. To knock out the biggest, strongest people on the planet, it takes a truly extraordinary amount of power, and nobody had power like Mike Tyson. Tyson is famous for many reasons, not all of them good, but what makes Tyson so legendary when it comes to matters inside the ring is first and foremost his absolutely unbelievable ability to knock out anybody and everybody, sometimes in impossible seeming ways. In this video, we'll be taking a tour through the highlight reels and watching a master at work. What follows are some of the most stunning knockouts from the man who made a career out of toppling the biggest and the baddest. Sit back, relax, but keep your distance as we watch Mike Tyson putting down monsters. Trevor Berbick. Trevor Berbick was a Jamaican heavyweight who came into the boxing world by storm in the late 1970s. He started out competing in the Olympics, then transitioned to professional boxing, where he won his first 11 fights, 10 of which he won by knockout. At 6'2", 220 pounds, Berbick was an imposing statue of pure strength and muscle. In 1986, he won the world heavyweight title despite being the underdog against Pinklon Thomas. Months later, the 32-year-old was poised to defend his title, and as one of the strongest and quickest fighters the world had yet seen, he was heavily favored to do so. Making the path seem even breezier was the fact he was up against a 20-year-old kid from Brooklyn who was several inches shorter than him. At just under 6 feet and more than 10 years younger, Mike Tyson was still very much on the ascent in the boxing world. He was the #1 ranked heavyweight. He also had a 27-0 record with a whopping 25 knockouts. Still, there were those who doubted he could win against the world heavyweight champion. Tyson put those doubters to shame, and he did it shockingly fast. From the moment the bell rang, Tyson dominated his opponent, pummeling him. The first round ended while Mike was still ramping up his onslaught, sending Berbick across the ring just before the bell. The second round would be shorter and even worse for Berbick. Twice, Tyson knocked the defending champ to the canvas. The first time came within seconds. Tyson soon dropped him again, and this time, Berbick stayed down. The Jamaican giant who had once defeated Muhammad Ali was now supine and conquered, thanks to the inestimable intensity of the kid from Brooklyn. With this earth-shattering knockout, Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and he established himself as the best in the world. Buster Mathis Jr. Many years after he was already recognized as the baddest man on the planet, Mike Tyson had another all-time knockout against a so-called monster named Buster Mathis Jr. Mathis was a heavyweight who descended from boxing royalty. His father had competed in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics and had squared up against all-time greats like Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. Buster Jr. followed in his father's footsteps with an illustrious early career. He won over a dozen fights against big names and eventually fought for the USBA belt against a guy on cocaine called the Bounty Hunter. No, really? I'm not making that up. Mike Hunter, aka the Bounty Hunter, was the defending USBA heavyweight champion in 1993. He just barely managed to beat Mathis by split decision. But his win was later voided when he tested positive for cocaine. The following years were even better for the young star. By 1995, he'd managed to win the USBA title twice in a row. That meant he was ready for the fight of his life, a November matchup against Mike Tyson at the MGM Grand Arena. Things didn't quite turn out as expected though. Tyson, who it's worth mentioning, had just spent 3 years in prison, injured his thumb. This eventually led to the fight being delayed until December 16th and switching locations from Las Vegas to Philadelphia. The long-anticipated matchup was broadcast for free on Fox and had millions of viewers. Tyson didn't come out as strong as fans expected him to. The younger Mathis was mostly able to avoid his punches, frustrating the heavyweight legend. This lasted for the first 2 rounds, and it lasted for most of the third round as well. But soon enough, a few of Tyson's lethal punches landed. To the awe of the millions who were watching, the upstart Buster Mathis Jr. toppled to the canvas. The fight was awarded to Tyson via knockout, the 37th knockout of his career. What makes this knockout even more shocking is that it ended up helping to end Buster Mathis Jr.'s career. The knockout came weeks after his father had passed away. Just 10 days after the fight had ended, Mathis's trainer also passed away. This sad confluence of events ultimately led to Buster Mathis Jr.'s early retirement at just 26 years old. Larry Holmes. Back in 1988, when Tyson himself was still in his early 20s, he faced another bona fide monster by the name of Larry Holmes. Holmes was nearly 40 when he met the young Tyson, but he remained one of the most imposing figures in the sport. At 6'3", 225 pounds, with a 6'9" wingspan, Holmes had been the textbook image of a scary heavyweight for over a decade, but now he stood in the way of an up-and-coming heavyweight who, in his own way, would prove even scarier. Mike Tyson was 17 years younger, stood more than 3 inches shorter, and had a wingspan that was nearly a foot shorter. But by this time, he'd made significant waves in the sport, unifying the 3 major world championships over the past year and a half. Holmes, on the other hand, was past his prime and had not even been in the ring in almost 2 years. The purse for both men was over $3 million each, with Holmes' being slightly higher. It was a matchup destined for the record books, fittingly dubbed heavyweight history during its promotion. Tyson's then record of 32 wins, no losses, and 28 knockouts was incredible, but Holmes' record was incredible too. He'd only lost twice, tallying up 48 total wins and a whopping 34 knockouts. When the epic fight actually started, however, all the hype quickly gave way to the reality. Tyson was visibly much faster than Holmes, and despite the size difference, he proved stronger too. Holmes soon began resorting to a tactic often used against Tyson in his early years, which was to essentially hold Tyson as much as possible in a sheer effort to slow him down. The efforts would prove futile. In the 4th round, things went downhill for Holmes in dramatic fashion. There were several close calls where Tyson nearly had Holmes beat, first against the ropes, and then after a serious pummeling that knocked Holmes down for almost a full count. Holmes staggered back up, only to immediately get pummeled again. With just seconds remaining in the 4th round, Tyson once again knocked Holmes to the canvas, now for the 3rd time in a row. Referee Joe Cortez had seen enough, and at the close of the round, he awarded the fight to Tyson by technical knockout. This was genuinely a shocking moment for the world of boxing. The young Tyson had dominantly toppled one of the greatest and most imposing heavyweights in the sport, causing the so-called Eastern assassin to fall not just once, but several times. Immediately after the loss, Holmes announced his second retirement. However, a few years later, perhaps not content to go out on that note, Holmes returned to boxing once again, winning several high-profile fights and eventually facing Evander Holyfield, the undisputed heavyweight champ, in 1992. Though Holmes ultimately lost, he put up a good fight and did much to sweeten the last chapter of his decorated career. He never fully erased the memory of his loss to Tyson, though, and he never could. It remains one of the more legendary fights in history, a time when Mike Tyson truly put down an all-out monster. Francois Botha. Facing Mike Tyson is always intimidating beyond words, but perhaps no man had to face Tyson in a more intimidating situation than South African boxer Francois Botha. After the most famous fight of Tyson's career, namely the one where he bit off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear and got disqualified, Tyson's boxing license was revoked. He then went on a forced 15-month hiatus until October 1998, when a commission voted in favor of reinstating his license. Now, the question on everyone's mind became, who will Tyson fight next? The baddest man on the planet had bitten and gored his last opponent, then sat waiting for over a year while his energy simply built up inside. It would have to be a hell of a brave man, or maybe even a straight-up lunatic, to step into the ring with him now. That brave lunatic turned out to be Francois Botha, who at the time boasted a 39-1 record with 24 knockouts. The man nicknamed the White Buffalo was confident before the press in anticipation of the matchup, stating rather modestly but firmly that he would knock Tyson out in the 7th round. Tyson's pre-fight banter was, to the shock of nobody, significantly more aggressive. He told the press, quote, "I am going right at him and I expect him to go down cold. I expect him to die." Unimpressed by the apparent fruits of Tyson's 15 months of self-reflection, many criticized Tyson for this remark, but it wasn't enough to discourage Botha. In fact, if anything, it only egged him on. The fight took place at the world-famous MGM Arena in Las Vegas on January 16, 1999. A sold-out crowd filled the legendary arena to see the much-awaited return of the so-called baddest man on the planet. However, those rooting for Tyson would have been disappointed with the early rounds. Tyson was understandably rusty, and throughout the first round, he struggled to land punches against the nimble South African. As the round came to a close, Tyson got hold of Botha's arm and refused to let go even after the bell. Botha tried to punch his way free, and soon enough, the two were swinging at each other even though the round was over. Both corners and MGM security had to run into the ring to separate them, with everyone in the arena holding their breath. Referee Richard Steele issued warnings to both fighters, then allowed round 2 to begin. Tyson continued to mess with Botha's arms in not necessarily legal ways. He repeatedly clinched Botha's arm, arousing complaints from Botha. Eventually, referee Steele had to issue another warning to Tyson, but Tyson seemingly ignored the warning and pulled the same maneuver once again. Steele called time and deducted a point from Tyson. Despite the antics, Francois Botha fought well for 4 rounds, outscoring Tyson overall. Then, it all went to hell in the 5th round. Botha's hopes of toppling the boxing legend were swiftly silenced when Tyson at last overcame his initial rustiness and slammed Botha with a right hand just seconds before the end of the 5th round. Botha hit the canvas, and although he wasn't out cold like Tyson had predicted, he ultimately failed just barely to get back on his feet in time. Steele awarded the fight to Tyson via knockout, the 40th of his career. The 6'2" Botha was a serious heavyweight, challenging for titles several times in his career. His ability to mostly outmaneuver the great Mike Tyson, even a slightly rusty Mike Tyson, shows what a monster the South African was in the ring, but like so many monsters before and after, Botha was ultimately put down by Iron Mike. Michael Spinks. Of all the times Mike Tyson put down monsters, there is arguably none more famous than his historic fight against Michael Spinks. When the pair met in 1988, both were undefeated. Both were also heavyweight champions, Spinks being the ring and lineal champion, Tyson being the IBF, WBC, and WBA champion. This was about as heavily anticipated a fight as there could ever be. At the time, its $70 million gross was the largest in the history of boxing. Fans were foaming at the mouth to see two champions hash it out to see who the true champion really was. The result they would get would be nothing short of shocking. Moments before the fight, Spinks manager Butch Lewis tried to pull what he called, quote, a little psyche on Tyson, protesting that there was a bump in his gloves that had to be smoothed out before the fight could start. It backfired. Tyson then issued a now infamous quote, "You know, I'm gonna hurt this guy." Tyson came out ferocious at the opening bell, pummeling Spinks and driving him to the ropes. Referee Frank Cappuccino warned Tyson to, quote, knock it off, referring to Tyson's tendency to elbow opponents on the ropes. Tyson backed off, and soon enough, none of that would matter. The 21-year-old Tyson, in his absolute prime, continued to pummel Spinks, landing brutal punches that were quickly taking their toll. Spinks took a knee. This alone shocked announcers who exclaimed it was the first time Spinks had ever done so in a professional fight. Seconds later, something even more amazing than that happened. With a left-hand combination, Tyson put his rival heavyweight champion flat on the floor. It was just the 8th punch Tyson landed. 91 seconds in, the fight was over. Tyson later said that after the first punch, he saw Spinks wobble, and he knew right then and there he was going to win. The fight surpassed the most recent Super Bowl as the highest-grossing single-day sports event to ever happen to date. It launched Tyson to ever greater status, essentially untouchable in the heavyweight world, and earned him a record $22 million purse. For Spinks, it summarily ended his career. He never fought again, retiring only a month later. That is what you call putting down a monster.